Making the Forbes list this year in 30 under 30 in the retail and e-commerce category, you wouldn't immediately assume my background is in construction. Yeah, that's right. Before all of this started, I was working full-time as a construction manager at JLL while completing a full-time construction management and property degree at UNSW. However, like any young girl with too much disposable income, I spent all my money, and I mean all of it, on clothes and clubbing. So it only seems natural that the idea for Clutch came to me where all good ideas come. A $10 gig at Chinese Laundry. For anybody that's been to Chinese Laundry, you will know that it is a notoriously sweaty club. And the 30-odd pieces of fashion tape that I had used to tape myself into a jumpsuit stood no chance. And while I flashed everybody in the vicinity, including Dom, in a moment of sheer frustration and embarrassment, I was like, wouldn't it be so much easier if I could just glue myself into my clothes? And then I was like, that's actually a really good idea. And then, having never had an original experience in my life, I thought, well, surely somebody else has thought about this one before, right? So when I went home that night to do a little bit of market research, I was pretty surprised to find that there was nothing on the market that did what I wanted it to do, which was a seriously strong, sweat-resistant but water-soluble clothes adhesive that is hypoallergenic, vegan, palm oil-free, compatible with all fabrics, and the packaging's made of 100% recycled and recyclable packaging. Simples. Now, I am a construction manager, and a delusional one at that. So then I set forth on what ended up being a 4-year-long journey to invent and patent the world's first glue alternative to fashion tape. Now, I'm no scientist. I didn't even do business, economics, or science at high school, but like any good construction manager, you know you just need a little bit of money and to delegate. And I knew that I needed to find somebody who could invent this formula for me, but it's my IP and my formula. And I knew that universities got people in to do research projects, so I decided to email the UNSW Chemical Engineering Department. I didn't email them once, I didn't email them twice, I emailed them 27 times before I got a response. They pointed me in the direction of somebody who might want to do a little side project for me, and I went, great. I sent him an NDA, and we jumped on a call. I briefed him on the task at hand, and the first thing that he said to me was, but Annabel, why would you want a water-soluble glue? That's when I realised I'd met my maker. Somebody who was really interested in the science and the challenge, but had absolutely no idea what the end product really was. So, after a 30-minute call and learning about the 9 PhDs this man had under his belt, we agreed on a price and the invention process began. A year later, 12 failed samples and $35,000 down the drain, we found the Clutch formula. Yay! A feeling that I think I can only amount to somebody summiting Mount Everest, maybe. A feeling that you think that what you wanted to do was impossible, but it was, quite frankly, possible. But then the realization and the humbleness really got to me because I was like, it turns out that I actually need to climb back down the mountain now too, which then ended up taking me 3 years to globally patent, trademark, brand, market, find a sustainable packaging supplier, and find a reputable manufacturer to make this for me. I reached out to over 100 different manufacturers across APAC, and only 2 came back to me saying that they could make it. One of them happened to be 15 minutes up the road from my parents' house, so to save on freight costs, I just went with them. On the 1st of December 2022, we launched Clutch. We sold maybe 10 tubes to my friends and mostly family, including my dad, who I forced to buy one, and he was just sitting on the other end of the dining table as me at the time. And then one fateful day, 3 months later, I uploaded a 10-second TikTok of a spaghetti strap falling off my shoulder and me clutching it back on, and I went to bed. The next day I woke up to a broken phone because it turns out that TikTok had gone very viral. We had reached over 9 million people and we had over 420,000 likes. It turns out that Shopify had gone equally as mad. We had sold over $160,000 worth of stock overnight, selling us out of all 5,000 units. I quickly called all of my friends to come over to my Bondi share house and hand pack every single order that was going to over 40 different countries. It turns out that people's grievances with fashion tape struck a nerve, and fashion is famously inequitable. But Clutch gives you the power to wear anything with confidence. If our clothes aren't going to be made for everybody, we make sure you can control the narrative, how they sit, how they fit, and how they make you feel. Are your bike shorts riding up? Clutch. Are your socks falling into your shoe? Clutch. Are your pocket squares falling into your breast pocket? Clutch. Are your straps falling off your shoulder? Clutch. No matter your fashion need, we're coming in clutch. However, shortly after we'd shipped all of these orders out, we started receiving some emails from customers saying that their tubes had arrived damaged. It turns out that the manufacturer's sealing machine was too hot and had actually pierced a lot of the seals in the tubes, making them explode and leak in transit. This meant issuing mass refunds, it meant producing more stock because we were out of stock, and it also meant that we had to set up a 3PL in the USA because the Americans were mad that they had to pay for shipping and wait 2 weeks for it to arrive, albeit a damaged tube at that. Fair enough. Although we were officially viral, it still wasn't quite the time to quit our day jobs just yet. The main response we were getting from our audience was that they needed Clutch now, and that it wasn't really a product that they needed until they did. So, with that said, I decided that Clutch belonged on a retail shelf. Now, I don't know any retailers or any connections in retail, so I just decided that I would just start guessing email addresses. One fateful day, I guessed over 300 email addresses and landed into the correct inbox of the Priceline buyer, where a year after launch, we ended up on the shelves of Priceline. We absolutely crushed launch. It was the best day of our lives. We became and still remain their #1 best-selling product. However, this wasn't without its costs. We had to commit to stock that we had never bought such a large volume before. For the first time ever, we ended up putting money into a marketing spend to support the launch, and we had to make some custom in-store display units because obviously, as a single SKU product, it was going to get lost on the shelf. Candidly, our bank account was deeply in the red. So it still wasn't quite the time to quit our day jobs just yet. A couple months later, another guess of an email address landed us on the shelves of a much larger retailer, CVS in the USA. And then the disaster of all disasters struck. Our factory went into liquidation. So I had to frantically call a contact that I had nurtured for a rainy day to manufacture over 30,000 units of stock. And then I locked my family and our boyfriends in a warehouse for an entire weekend where we checked, squeezed, packed, and then assembled onto a pallet the entire order. Our public liability insurance also skyrocketed because the Americans love to sue. And we had to air freight all of the stock over. So again, you can imagine it just wasn't quite the time to quit our day jobs just yet. We were still really, really unprofitable. This was a really important lesson in learning that retail ranging wasn't necessarily the silver bullet that we all think that it is. Now, around the time that this all happened, I got a DM from somebody asking if I wanted to go on Shark Tank. I said no. And then I eventually said yes. The reason why I said no to begin with was because every single pitch in Shark Tank that I'd ever seen was inherently negative. It was sharks that were beating down these businesses. And in my mind, I was building a really reputable business that needed to be taken seriously. And that was my main concern. Me basically going in front of 5 sharks and saying, buy my boob glue, like we all know how that story goes. So in order to mitigate that risk, I was like, well, we're just going to have to be as prepared as possible. So we ended up doing 100 hours of preparation in the lead up, and I think it went pretty well. We ended up being coined the best Shark Tank pitch of all time, and the odds of people seeing that pitch in this room is quite high. It's been seen by over 350 million people across TikTok and Instagram. Insane. Now, although I got offers from all 5 sharks on the show, and I said yes to 2 on the show, I'll let you in on a really little secret, maybe not so little. I actually said no to them off camera. The main reason being was that they were asking for founders' shares. For anybody that doesn't know, cut a really long story short, it means that they can vote you out of your own business. So we parted ways. Around the time that this Shark Tank episode came out, which was in November last year, this actually really nicely coincided with our 6-week trial in Woolworths. The deal was pretty simple. If you sell through your stock in 6 weeks, we'll go national. So they gave us 2 weeks to prepare a purchase order of 30,000 units. Again, I locked my family in the warehouse and we checked every single tube. And then we did a same-day courier to drop it off at Woolworths Distribution Centre, only to miss our delivery slot by 1 minute because there was a Coca-Cola truck that had overstayed their welcome in their delivery time slot. Priceline was selling out every single week. So you can imagine my surprise when it turns out we got the sales data after 4 weeks into our 6-week trial and we'd sold none. It turns out that they just hadn't put Clutch on the shelf yet. It was out the back. Yeah, just nobody had put it on the shelf. And then after the 6 weeks, it turns out that only 40% of the Woolworths stores had put the stock out onto the shelf. Now, the agreement was any stock that didn't sell, we would buy back, which worked for us. We were selling out all the time and we needed the stock. However, Woolworths then decided not to tell us and just put Clutch on clearance instead. Now, for anybody that doesn't know how a retail sale works, the retailer always maintains their margin and it's the supplier that always bears the cost of the sale. So, for every single tube sold at a 75% clearance, we owed Woolworths $21.75. Yeah, that was insane. At the same time, we were doing a range review with Chemist Warehouse, who saw that Clutch was on clearance at Woolworths and perceived that as we weren't performing, so we lost their interest and they didn't range Clutch. It was a devastating blow. While we were still working our full-time jobs, Clutch was deeply unprofitable, but we were still selling thousands of units a week. It felt like I was playing a game of snakes and ladders, but like every single ladder actually then also turned out to be a snake. Around the time we were preparing for our infamous Shark Tank pitch, Clutch was actually accepted into the StartMate Accelerator program, which at the final minute we actually declined because it just didn't make sense for us commercially. But what we did end up doing was start thinking about what our business would look like if we actually just did a real cap raise for our real evaluation, which was $10 million. Not bad for a business that had been in business for 18 months. I began to realise that Clutch had become bigger than me. And with the right strategic help on my cap table, we could open so many doors that currently felt bolted shut. However, the main response we were getting from people around us was, no investor's going to take you seriously if you're not already working in the business full time. I was at a crossroads. The money was way better spent working on the business and scaling the business and improving it than it is supporting my lifestyle and in my own pocket. I thought, wouldn't investors understand that? Wouldn't they understand the sacrifices that we're making for the sake of the longevity of our business? And the answer to that was yes. Yes, they did understand. So we went on to close the world's largest pre-seed cap raise for an FMCG company globally. Then, on the 1st of January 2025, myself and my sister and Clutch CMO, Lucy, ended up quitting our day jobs and going all in on Clutch. This was 2 years after launch and over 7.5 years since that fateful night at Chinese Laundry. However, and we always know that there's a but by now, quitting our day jobs was really, really hard. The feelings of isolation were overwhelming. I thought I'd traded a buzzy, fun life in the office for what felt like a life sentence of working from home. I was no longer learning new skills from my day job. And for the first time, I was financially responsible for me and my entire team. All of these feelings, it just felt, frankly, diabolical. However, what we've managed to achieve in the past 10 months has been nothing short of amazing. Our revenue is up 300% in the past 10 months than it is in the entire calendar year for last year. We've reached over 200 million people organically on TikTok, on Instagram, and we've globally patented and trademarked Clutch in over 45 different countries. We've also rolled out into a bunch of new retailers internationally, including Boots in the UK, Chemist Warehouse New Zealand, Etos in the Netherlands, City Super in Hong Kong, Universal Store and Perfect Stranger in Australia, and soon to be Urban Outfitters in the US. We've also developed 11 new Clutch SKUs designed to elevate your wardrobe functionality even further, creating reliable, sustainable, and world-first solutions to problems you've been dealing with for far too long. And most importantly, we've sold over 500,000 units of Clutch, which is the equivalent of saving 14 tonnes of fashion tape waste out of landfill, creating a truly cyclical fashion ecosystem. Now, there's a few reasons why we realised it was the right time to go all in on our business. Firstly, I'd fleshed out my supply chain and I'd created some really strong foundations for the business. However, I'm sure that you're thinking, Annabel, you could have done so much more if you'd quit earlier. However, keeping my day job for the first 2 years was honestly the best decision I've ever made as a founder. To be totally honest, the main reason being it made me take more risks because with financial and job security elsewhere, I truly had nothing to lose. So I guess what I'm trying to tell you is if you're starting a business, don't quit your day job too early. Thank you. Hello.